August 2014. Today we're in North Texas where we find 23-year-old Christina Morris. Her dad Mark said from a young age she just loved being around people and making friends, never want to be shy or hold back, and the first one to put her hand up or volunteer to do something. Her parents divorced when she was a baby and she lived mainly with her dad, stepmom Anna, and siblings, but always saw her mom Johnny, who called her the love of her life. And when Johnny remarried her stepdad Ronnie, Christina's family got even bigger, with her saying it was just like having two moms and two dads. Everyone was just that close. After getting her degree in marketing, she started working for an online dating service and had just been told she could start working in the photography department. Photography and design were big passions for her, and this was an exciting next step. Christina was in a year-long relationship with 23-year-old Hunter Foster, but the pair went back so much further, knowing each other since the 7th grade. They had been long distance for a while, as he was an aspiring model and actor spending time in New York. But now he was back in Texas and they had started living together in an apartment in Fort Worth. The couple had definitely had their fair share of ups and downs. Being long distance had been challenging, and to go from that to living together had been an adjustment to say the least. Hunter was also out of work currently and partying a lot, and Christina was working all the time. There was a lot of pressure on her to support them both. Friday, August 29, 2014 was the start of Labor Day weekend, and people wanted to be out with friends celebrating and throwing parties. Christina was no exception. She and Hunter had been fighting that day, and from her car she called her friend Taylor to talk about the issues she was having with him, worrying about what their future realistically looked like. Taylor calmed her down, and Christina decided she wasn't going to let this ruin her night. She wanted to get dressed up, see her friends, and take her mind off things. She took a selfie in her car and then set off on the 45-minute drive from Fort Worth to Plano to meet some old friends from high school for a reunion. The first group gathered at an apartment belonging to Paulina Petrosky, and at around 11 p.m. they were having drinks in an area called the Shops at Legacy. Firstly at Henry's Tavern, then another bar called Scruffy Duffy's. Christina, Paulina, and two more people, Sabrina Boss and Enrique Orochi, were all picked up on camera walking down a street at 11:35 p.m. When the last call for drinks rang out, they returned to Paulina's apartment with several more people from school. People at the party said everyone was pretty drunk, but Christina only had a couple of drinks in case she decided to drive home. She was also a little despondent because of the fighting with Hunter, and her mood was very up and down. At 2:12 a.m. Christina texted Hunter asking him to pick her up as she couldn't find her keys. But he was also out drinking with friends in downtown Dallas and didn't see her message. She was upset that she couldn't get hold of him and tried sending several more messages, but he didn't reply. She briefly contemplated staying over at Paulina's but decided against it when she finally found her car keys. She wanted to see Hunter, sort things out, and was going to drive back. As her battery was on its final bars, she texted Hunter again saying, "I'm sorry. I really am sorry. Why can't you talk to me? Good night. I hope you're okay. Because I'm not. Phone's dead." Then she left Paulina's and started walking to her car. It was just before 4 a.m. and the night was definitely over for everyone. As people began to stir a few hours later, some slightly worse for wear, people were texting each other to make sure everyone got home okay. But Christina wasn't replying to anyone, and her phone was going straight to voicemail. She did have a shift that day, so maybe she was still sleeping or getting ready for work. But her shift came and went, and Christina was a no-show. A couple more days would pass, and she had now missed 2 shifts at work. Her friends contacted her mom, Johnny. She hadn't heard anything, and with a feeling in her stomach she had never had before, she called Hunter, who didn't answer, and her ex-husband, Mark, who did, but he was none the wiser. At 11 p.m. on the 2nd of September, a missing persons report was filed. Detectives went to Paulina's apartment, and she told them where Christina had left her car that night. When they got to the parking lot, alarmingly, her car was still there, parked up on the first floor, still locked. When Mark and Anna got there at about midnight, they opened it. Neither her phone nor bag were in there. There didn't appear to be any signs of a struggle nearby. Her car doors hadn't been forced open, and nothing appeared to have been dropped on the ground either. She definitely hadn't reached her car that night, so something had happened to her on the way. Paulina told police that she saw Christina leave her apartment with Enrique Orochi, but what happened after they left? She had no clue. What did she know about Enrique, they asked. The answer was very little. Paulina herself had only met Enrique a couple of months beforehand, and the only thing they had in common with him was the fact they went to school together, but hadn't ever really spoken. They knew his face, but they didn't really know anything about him. However, given the fact it was a school reunion, she had invited him along to join. Detectives gave Enrique a call, and he said he wanted to help as best he could. Unfortunately, though, his memory was hazy. That night he had about 10 shots, 5 or 6 beers, some Adderall and weed, and that was just what he could remember. He said he'd spoken only a few words to Christina over the evening. He added that when he mixed drinks, he sometimes blacked out and forgot big chunks of time. He said they left the apartment together, but they split up as they reached the end of the apartment complex. She walked off on her own in a different direction. Enrique remembered her making a phone call to someone and heard her raising her voice, although he didn't know the ins and outs. She had been fighting with Hunter all day, and police had to establish that he hadn't come to pick her up or meet her on the way and something bad had happened. He hadn't tried to make contact with her, and he hadn't reported her missing to anyone. Hunter told detectives that when she didn't come home, he assumed that she was staying with her parents, or maybe she had been picked up for a DUI. He'd lost his phone while he was out, which was why he was off the radar, and he said in general he was just distracted with other things. Records showed a call from Enrique's cell phone at 3:50 a.m. to Hunter. It seemed Christina was also trying to use his phone to get hold of him. The phone call was followed by 2 text messages, one at 3:53 a.m. and one at 3:55 a.m. They asked to look through Hunter's phone, but he said he felt uncomfortable handing it over and would rather leave the station if he was free to do so. They thought it was definitely an odd reaction to have, considering his girlfriend of a year was missing under quite serious circumstances, but given the fact they had been arguing, it was possible he just wanted to give them both space, and everything he was saying was totally plausible. And a few calls to his friends did completely rule him out. He could be accounted for all night and over the following days. Using cell phone pings and bank information, it was also confirmed that Hunter had not been near the Plano area at all. Later it would turn out he had sold drugs to an undercover federal officer in downtown Dallas, which was why he did not want to hand over his phone, and which would also become part of his alibi. Police were at square one again and circled back to the people at the party. Enrique Orochi, even people at the party said it was really strange to hear his name in these circumstances. Enrique hadn't even paid attention to Christina that night. The pair had barely spoken. He was far more focused on another guest, Sabrina, the fourth and final person on the CCTV at 11:30 p.m., walking down the street to the bars. Things had got awkward at Paulina's apartment when Enrique refused to move off the seat because he wanted to sit next to Sabrina, getting angry when she didn't want to sit with him. Sabrina eventually went into the spare bedroom to sleep, and a few minutes later, Enrique followed her and saying, "Fine, I'll just go home." He then started getting ready to leave, tagging along with Christina as she was leaving too. Another guest and friend of Christina's, Steven, had called her about 10 minutes after she and Enrique left to see if she'd made it to her car. She told him that they were almost there and that she would text him when she was. At this point, she was not on her own, as Enrique had said. She was still with him. 5 minutes later, Steven texted her again to see if she got there, but she didn't reply and the messages were being delivered as green, indicating she had no service. This was further confirmed by CCTV, which had picked up both Enrique and Christina walking together. Firstly, just outside a bank heading in the direction of the parking lot, and secondly, just as they were walking into the parking area. A clip of CCTV can't always show a full picture, but police felt confident that it looked as if she was walking with Enrique willingly, sometimes even trailing behind him, and it didn't look like she was under any duress. Unfortunately, the cameras pointing at Christina's car on the inside was only activated by motion and nothing else was picked up. Nothing until 3 minutes later when another camera showed Enrique's car pulling out. But Christina's car never moved, and she never left on foot either. The only way for her to have left that building was in someone else's car. The only conclusion to draw was that it was Enrique's car she was in. The only other car that was picked up leaving the parking lot at around the same time was confirmed to be an Uber driver looking for his passenger. Both the driver and passenger could be accounted for as they followed more cameras and phone pings, and they confidently ruled both out. After they saw this footage, they asked Enrique to come into the station again. They pulled out a diagram of the parking area and told him to point to where everything had happened. He told them the same story and said he was parking in a totally different area, which would have required him to enter through a different way, and they had separated long before they got there. Police showed him the footage, knowing this was just not true. He suddenly went quiet, seemed a little surprised and hesitant, but then he had a change of story, and told the detectives that he and Christina had indeed walked to their cars together. The pair were in fact parked near each other, and perhaps during the night he had moved his car and forgotten. But still, police did not have any footage of her entering his car. No physical evidence at the scene and no motive for why he might be involved. Detectives asked to search his car, but he said he had a business meeting the next day, so he needed his car to be available for it. He had scratches and bruises on his body, bloodied knuckles, and a mark which police thought might be a bite. He said these were all injuries that came from fixing his car. A tire fell on him which bruised his arm, and in a rage he punched his car, leaving a dent in the side of it. But then he changed his story again and said he'd been in a fight but didn't say who with. When he finally let them look at his vehicle, it was clear it had been recently vacuumed and cleaned. They saw the dent he was referring to, but they didn't have a proper warrant to look any deeper. Enrique was allowed to leave again, and police said he was not considered a person of interest in her disappearance at this time. They were still waiting on phone data analysis and were hoping this would show where he went after he left the lot. Enrique was a manager at an Allen Sprint store and had a shift that Saturday at 8 a.m., just 4 hours after he was seen with Christina. When they spoke to his coworker, she said he was 3 hours late to start his shift, and when he got there it was pretty obvious that something wasn't right. They said he looked like S******, walked with a limp and was complaining his ribs hurt. He was out of sorts all day. The reason he was late was because he had stopped at a car wash beforehand. The cameras at the car wash showed Enrique staring at his trunk for a while before opening it, scrubbing it and cleaning everything out. It was now 5 days into the search, and helicopters and drones were scouting the Plano area too. There was not a single clue anywhere, and despite a huge push for the public to come forward, her family giving out flyers to anyone that passed, no one had any information. The reward had now increased to $25,000. Their last real shot was Enrique and Christina's phone data, which would show which towers they pinged off. And since they walked into the parking lot, their phones had both been pinging off the same cell phone towers. At 4:56 a.m., Enrique and Christina's phones were pinging off the same cell phone towers for over an hour since the CCTV footage. At that point her phone ran out of battery, but his continued to ping off of towers for another 30 minutes before he got to his house. Enrique had made an hour-and-a-half ride in total. Enrique was sticking to his story and even decided to go to the media to tell it. Hunter, who had now been cleared, was speaking a little to Christina's parents and the media. He said he was emotionally unstable and was riddled with guilt that he hadn't gone to meet her that night, thinking that if he'd gone, this wouldn't have happened. Christina's family and friends took to protesting, wanting answers from Enrique. Mark said, "What we really wish is that Enrique would talk. I'm not accusing him of anything, but he has to know something. It just doesn't make any sense." Enrique said he wasn't hiding. He was protecting himself. He said, "I pray for them every single day. Me and my family do. When I go to church, I kneel down to God and say, please let them find Christina so this can all be over with." And in early November, Enrique was officially named as a suspect by Plano police. They said at this point he was not suspected to have hurt Christina, but he was being accused of interfering with the investigation. They now had a warrant to search and forensically examine his car, and DNA testing would finally give them what they needed. Christina's DNA was found inside the trunk of Enrique's car in several spots. It was such a large amount of DNA, it could not have been from a transfer. It could only have come from saliva or blood, and it was statistically impossible for the DNA to belong to anyone else. In December 2014, Enrique was arrested on aggravated kidnapping charges. Police said given what they had found and the fact there had been no activity on her accounts, they were presuming she was dead. But without her body, no idea how she had died or where she might be, the most they could charge him with was kidnapping. A month later, a grand jury indicted him on aggravated kidnapping charges and 4 counts of sexual assault of a child. In regards to the child abuse charges, police said the 22-year-old had had sex with a 16-year-old. He claimed he was dating at the time, but these charges were later dismissed. According to court records, the grand jury believed he intended to inflict bodily injury, sexually abuse, and terrorize Christina by intentionally or knowingly abducting her, by restricting the movements without her consent so as to interfere substantially with her liberty, by secreting or holding her in a place where she was not likely to be found. Enrique pleaded not guilty, and the prosecutor said he was now facing the hardest case he'd ever taken on. Enrique opted not to testify. There were 2 theories investigators and prosecution had about what happened that night. Both theories are rooted in the belief that Enrique had made a pass at Christina, possibly stemming from being rejected by Sabrina just minutes before and feeling embarrassed about it. The first theory was that Enrique had made this advance as they approached the cars, but Christina rejected him, and in a drunken rage, he hit her, forced her into the trunk, and drove off. The large dent on the side of his car, he claimed, came from punching. It had possibly come from a struggle with Christina. The marks on his knuckles had come from hitting her, not the car. Or A theory that seems to hold more weight given the fact it was only a 3-minute window from them entering the parking area to Enrique driving out was that he offered to take her back to Fort Worth and she willingly got into his car, and on the way an altercation broke out. Either she realized he was driving the opposite way to where she would have needed to go and she knew she was in trouble, or he made an advance on her, or both. When she tried to escape they fought and he forced her into his trunk. They believe given his injuries a violent struggle had definitely taken place. And Christina would have been dying or already dead at this point. Her dad said his daughter was really afraid of the dark, very claustrophobic, and the thought of her being in that position, scared, alone and fearing for her life, was too much to think about. In a sick twist of fate, she probably would have felt comforted by Enrique walking to her car with her, as her family said her fear was so bad she had to sleep with the lights on. Enrique had previously said he thought that Hunter needed to be looked at closer and might have been behind what happened to Christina. Even though Hunter had been eliminated from the investigation, he agreed to take the stand to testify about what he was doing the day she disappeared. Up until that point he invoked the Fifth Amendment and hardly spoke about any of it, but this all changed when he himself was arrested just a week before Enrique. He was now serving time in prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy to distribute ecstasy, and the undercover police officer he sold drugs to on the night Christina went missing resulted in a huge drugs bust. In an immunity deal, he agreed to give a truthful testimony in exchange for it not being held against him as it related to the federal drug violations. He said he knew he made a lot of mistakes and had a drug problem. Admitting his actions after she went missing didn't make him look good. He said rather than find out where she was, he carried on taking drugs with his friends and made some very bad choices. He was honest about the arguments they had had and the regrets he had about handling things. But he didn't have anything to do with what had happened to her and was deeply upset about the whole situation. The CCTV, the DNA and phone data did present a strong case, and one detective testified that he had found many images and videos of women depicting rape, being tied up, being mutilated and tortured on Enrique's phone as well. Enrique's defense team said they could pick everything apart. They argued that both Enrique's car and Christina's car were processed at the same lab, meaning there could have been cross-contamination. There was no CCTV which showed her getting into his vehicle, and the cell phone tower pings weren't always 100% accurate. In September 2016, the jury returned their verdict after almost 2 days of back and forth. He was found guilty of the first-degree crime of aggravated kidnapping. Enrique later appealed his sentence and asked for a new trial, but this was denied. From prison, he gave an interview and said, "I want to apologize to the Morris family for not being able to help them. My family and I are constantly praying for them and for Christina's well-being." He declined to talk about what happened after they entered the parking lot, or the DNA in his trunk. "I don't know how that got there. Could have been cross-contamination. They could have just planted it there because they didn't have any other suspect." Enrique said that the case against him was mostly circumstantial, and still says that the police should have focused more on Hunter. "I put my life in God's hands," he said. "He knows when I'll be getting out. It's up to him, really. I believe there is such a thing as justice. It's not fair to do time for something I didn't commit. I'm gonna fight until I die." To that, Christina's family responded, "We'll keep fighting back." As good as her family felt about the sentence, it didn't answer their biggest question. Where was Christina? Her family spent every day searching for her. Her dad often out by himself come rain or shine, working his way through the vast areas of bushland. Her mother moved across the state to make searching for her daughter a full-time thing, giving up her job in the process. Despite police believing she was dead, Christina's family really believed she was alive and likely being held against her will somewhere. Her mother, Johnny, carried on leaving her voicemails, wrote to her daily, reached out to her on Facebook, typing out all her thoughts and feelings and everything that her daughter had been missing back home. 4 years since Christina had vanished and 2 years since Enrique was sentenced. In March 2018, investigators went back to an area they had already searched once before, and it was here in a rural area of Anna, Texas, near a construction site skeletal remains were found. They were now building new houses in the area and digging things up, and a construction worker had found a human skull. Alongside the bones were some items of clothing. The bones and clothing were soon positively identified as 23-year-old Christina Morris's. But 4 years later, it was impossible to determine how she had been killed. Despite the fact they had found her, so far no additional charges have been filed against Enrique. One lawyer said, "Would need to be another kidnapping conviction for him to be convicted of capital murder. A capital murder charge with a possible death sentence in a new case is not likely for Orochi, since he's already been tried for kidnapping. Charging for that again would require a capital case, but that is forbidden by double jeopardy rules. He is already serving life and nothing will extend this sentence, even if it does go to trial again and he is found guilty of murder." And as we all know now, the pandemic was just around the corner, which pushed everything back significantly. At the writing of this episode, Enrique has still never admitted to anything. So what happened that early morning remains in the dark. Christina's mom said she knew her daughter would be proud of them for never giving up on their search, and now they could finally bring her home. They could rest knowing she was at peace. Her stepmom Anna said, "We have a place now to go be with her and talk to her. But this isn't the way we wanted it to end. But there is some measure of peace in the fact that we do have her." Christina's sister Sarah reiterated this and added, "We never wanted closure. Even if there was such a thing. We only wanted Christina." Little is known about the early life of John Parker. It is scarcely mentioned that he was born in 1970, had at least one sibling, and lived in Indiana, United States. He came from a middle-class family and was always an entrepreneurial young man with a desire for independence, self-improvement, and a hunger to take on the world. Therefore, it is not surprising that immediately after graduating from high school, he sought ways to earn money and, according to his brother, his first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant. Though he did not last long there. For reasons unknown, John became angry at work and quit. However, this did not deter his ambitions, and sooner rather than later, he found a new job that not only allowed him more independence in his tasks, but also led him to discover his true calling, sales. John began working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family mocked him, but in a short time, John proved to everyone that he had found his direction in life. In fact, by the end of his first year, he was practically the company's #1 salesman in the area and announced he would not settle for just that. Working long hours from 12 to 16 hours a day, he became not only a sales leader whose achievements were recognized at company meetings, but also a guide for other salespeople who found new ideas, inspiration, and a role model in him. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a young woman who was born in October 1969 and lived in Texas in a low-income family of 3 children. She was very outgoing, and even though John was not looking to hire more salespeople at the time, Judy convinced him that she was the best in the sales field. Despite her young age, she was not a shy girl. In fact, she was a fully grown woman who, with her parents' consent, had married at 14 and was divorced with 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, by the time she met John. John decided to give this determined applicant a chance and became her mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Judy not only earned a place in the sales force led by John, but also won the heart of her boss. And sometime later, they embarked on a romantic relationship. John's life could not have been better. He had a well-earned reputation as an excellent salesman and trainer, and also had Judy's support in life and work. With these foundations, he decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming a sales and service operator for Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, passing on his personal secret and the enthusiasm that had made him a star in the sector. His company was recognized as one of the top in the area, and John always highlighted that he had achieved this success thanks to Judy's support. In 1992, with his professional life resolved, the couple got married, and in the following years, they dedicated themselves to demonstrating what a good salesperson could achieve in life. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the number of children in the family to 4. They moved residences several times, always to better locations, and the children began to enjoy the benefits earned through the hard work of John and Judy. Initially, he had no issues with his wife's children. Christina was a sweet little girl, and Daniel was somewhat hyperactive and mischievous. The Parkers enjoyed a good home, excellent schools for the children, high-end cars, and frequent vacations. John was amassing a significant fortune and did not want to hide it. On the contrary, he used it as an incentive for the young salespeople he trained, showing them what could be achieved through hard work. However, as time passed and Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems began. Christina's choice of friends was terrible, as she chose those with the worst behavior and engaged in drinking with them. Allegedly, according to some sources, she also used drugs. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Daniel was not on a good path either and seemed to be angry and poorly accompanied all the time. On one occasion, while with a group of friends, Daniel took John's car and drove around the neighborhood, destroying many of the mailbox posts. The next day, John went from house to house paying the owners for the damage caused to prevent them from reporting the boy to the police. Around this time, John was also called to his stepson's school to receive a complaint about the boy's bad behavior. It appears that on this occasion, John ended up hitting the young man, which of course generated tension in the relationship. After 9 years together, Judy finally took her family to Texas so they could see the humble place where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers who still lived there. During this trip, Judy complained to her brother that her marriage was failing and that John mistreated her children. The truth was that Judy, far from recognizing that her older children were on the wrong path, sided with them, which of course heated up what seemed to be a pressure cooker. If everything was already bad, things worsened when John began to suspect that his wife was being unfaithful with an employee of his company. True to his way of solving problems, John was not a man to sit and stew over a problem, but a man of action. To leave no room for doubt, he installed cameras in various parts of the office and finally obtained irrefutable proof that confirmed his suspicions. At that moment, John's world collapsed, and his previously cheerful and cordial behavior took a 180-degree turn. He began to drink, and under the influence of alcohol, he not only had terrible arguments with Judy, but also became rough towards his children. His daughter Tiffany received a beating with a belt when her teacher informed her father that she had not brought her homework to school. When the teacher saw the marks from the beating the next day, she called social services to report the incident. Before they arrived, John made it clear to the 4 kids that if they wanted to continue enjoying the luxurious life they had been living up to that moment, it was better to say nothing about the beating. Indeed, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel for what had happened, and he did not deny it. However, John's bad mood did not only affect his family. His employees and even the company's clients suffered from the betrayed husband's outbursts of rage. Seeking to put distance between his wife and her lover, he decided to move the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite still being in love with Judy and hoping that by removing her from temptation, they could have a fresh start, things did not improve. While Judy began to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, John let his beard grow, started smoking, his wardrobe was reduced to jeans, and he was constantly distracted. The business suffered as a result of his state, ending up almost bankrupt and having to sell his boat to stay afloat. Rumors circulated in the office that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man. Though it was unclear if the rumors were true, they undoubtedly fueled more disagreements. At a certain point, Judy informed him that she had decided to divorce, but it would not be that simple. John felt that he had given everything to his wife, pulled her out of poverty, accepted her children, showered her with luxuries, and above all, loved her to the point of idolatry. With that same passion turned into resentment, he began to cut off all his wife's sources of money. He made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and his secret weapon was the recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the scenario at the beginning of 2003, and of course, the tensions between the couple affected the children, whose behavior went from bad to worse. Even Tiffany spent the holidays grounded because she and a friend had started a fire on school grounds. The end of the arguments came on Thursday, April 17, 2003, when John and Judy went out to dinner alone at a restaurant, possibly trying to find a solution to their situation, or maybe just trying to tone down the confrontation. After dinner, they called home to check on the kids and announced they would return shortly. At that moment, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. Leaving the restaurant, they headed to the company, and John took the opportunity to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late. The couple arrived at the office in a deserted industrial area just before 10 p.m. Both entered the office while John talked to Jeff. Judy picked up her daughter's notebook and returned to the car parked outside. Minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side to search for something in the vehicle, when suddenly 2 loud bangs were heard and John collapsed on the parking lot floor. Instantly, the 911 received calls from Judy and the other from Jeff. As routine in such cases, police and medical assistance units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was declared dead on the scene. Upon interrogating Judy, who was inside the car at the time of the incident, the woman could practically contribute nothing. She stated she was sitting there when her husband came out of the office, opened the back door on the driver's side, and immediately heard 2 detonations. Judy recounted that her reaction to hearing the shots was to hide, protecting herself with the seat. And when she lifted her head, she only managed to glimpse what seemed to be a man in dark clothing running away from the car. John's wallet was missing, so at first glance, the incident seemed to have been a robbery. But the more the scene was analyzed, the more doubts arose in the investigators' minds. No one besides the couple knew they were going to be there, so a series of questions were formulated. Why would someone be looking to commit a random robbery in an industrial area that had no people in circulation at night? If it had been a robbery, why did they first take his life and only then stripped him of his wallet when in plain sight? John was wearing a $20,000 gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry. Why had the thief not searched the pockets as criminals usually do in these kinds of assaults? More questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene of the attack. This matched Judy's account of hearing 2 detonations. One of the shots ended John's life almost immediately, and as for the other, there was no official information. With their heads full of questions, the investigators began their work. And of course, the first person they took a statement from was Judy. She claimed that sometime before, her husband had had a heated argument with an employee of his company and identified the man. Beyond this, Judy could not provide anything more of interest beyond what she had said at the scene of the incident. Jeff was also not helpful. He was inside the office, and when he came out upon hearing the detonations, everything was already over. Meanwhile, the authorities contacted the Parker residence, and the call was answered by Christina, who was informed that her stepfather had passed away. With the robbery motive almost ruled out, detectives turned their focus towards John's circle, starting with the allegedly resentful employee. The man confirmed they had a significant argument, but said it had been amicably resolved. Moreover, he had an alibi that was investigated and verified. The investigation then expanded to nearly everyone close to the young businessman, business partners, past and current employees, competitors, and even John's friends and family. The only slightly suspicious finding was the interaction between the widow and the company's general manager. But there was no substantial evidence. Judy's demeanor during her husband's funeral was very intriguing. Comments mentioned Judy appearing cheerful and socializing with friends in stark contrast to the expected mourning behavior. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 children, was also noted to be comfortably reading a newspaper at the funeral. For days after John's murder, Daniel, 15, was brought in for questioning on suspicion of involvement. This suspicion was based on an incident 6 months prior, where police were alerted by gang members that Daniel had paid them to kill his stepfather, John. Although they said they never intended to follow through and had merely kept the money, the police deemed the story implausible, confiscating the money and filing a report without apparent further action. However, given John's eventual murder, investigators revisited Daniel's potential involvement. Under interrogation, Daniel confessed to paying individuals to harm John, intending not to kill, but to injure him, like breaking his legs. Despite detaining one of the youths Daniel allegedly negotiated with, he was released due to a solid alibi verified by the investigation. Daniel was released after 9 days due to lack of substantial evidence and his minor status. Later, it was revealed that John had issues with Judy's children, leading to more investigation into Daniel and bringing to light suspicions about Judy's daughter, Christina, 17. Christina denied everything when questioned. And like before, the alleged plan led nowhere. Given that both teenagers had shown a desire to eliminate John, investigators wondered where the money for these schemes was coming from, suspecting Judy as the only possible source. Further inquiries revealed that the relationship between the couple had significantly deteriorated prior to John's death, with at least one of Judy's affairs coming to light. However, sources indicated that John had no intention of leaving his wife and was seeking ways to salvage the relationship. The primary motive for Judy to target her husband appeared to be financial, with detectives discovering John had 2 life insurance policies totaling $1 million. Judy had attempted to claim this money after her husband's death, but the insurance company initially refused to pay, citing the ongoing investigation into his death. The payment was further complicated by John's father, who suspected Judy's involvement in his son's demise. Despite these leads, the case eventually stalled, with only circumstantial evidence available. Life moved on, but significant changes occurred within the Parker family household. Judy was hardly ever home, apparently busy with her new partner, Jeff, John's trusted manager. In her absence, the older siblings took care of their younger half-sisters, Tiffany and Erica. Months later, Judy and Jeff decided to move out of state with John's younger daughters, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina remained in the house, now pregnant and with a boyfriend. Though the investigation had hit a dead end, authorities kept the case open, regularly revisiting the files in hopes of finding something substantial. Their persistence paid off when, following a new lead, they interrogated some schoolmates of Christina and Daniel, who admitted to selling them a firearm. This information led detectives to investigate a piece of family-owned land used by Christina for shooting practice. Upon inspecting the area, Investigators indeed found several bullet casings. These findings were analyzed in laboratories and a significant clue was discovered. The bullet casings matched those from John's crime scene. In 2007, additional information emerged through a colleague, a narcotics officer who had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, involved in a drug case and arrested. Seeking leniency in his case, the ex-boyfriend disclosed a conversation with Judy, in which she mentioned that it was her son Daniel who had fired the shot that ended John's life. Confronted with this information, 21-year-old Christina, linked to the weapon used in the crime, quickly began to talk. She admitted to purchasing the weapon and calling her parents on the night of the incident, asking them to stop by the office under the pretense of picking up forgotten homework. She confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When 19-year-old Daniel was located and detained in Arizona, he was presented with the new ballistics evidence and his sister's account. He readily admitted to being the one who shot John, but claimed that Judy, their mother, was the mastermind behind the plot. Daniel disclosed that Judy had forged company checks to gather the necessary funds to hire hitmen to kill John. The amount stolen was reportedly $7,500. However, when the initial plan fell through because the hired individuals took the money without completing the job, Judy allegedly instructed them to purchase the weapon for her son to use instead. Furthermore, Daniel revealed it was Judy's idea to create the pretext for leaving the house that night by making the call about the homework. He stated he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accidental discharge while he was rifling through John's pocket for his wallet, following his mother's instructions. He was also told to return home without alerting his younger sisters, a task facilitated by Christina, who kept the girls occupied with television. The siblings claimed their mother had convinced them to commit the crime by alleging they were victims of abuse by John and promising them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also revealed that this was not Judy's first attempt to kill her husband. She had previously tried to poison his food, leading only to a brief hospitalization for John under the guise of food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charge and was released on bail several months later in March 2008. Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge to kill his stepfather and made a deal to admit his guilt and implicate his mother in the crime. In exchange for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to charge him with the more serious offense of murder, although he would still face a sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison. Daniel claimed that nearly a year before the incident, when he was 14, his mother and sister first asked him to help kill John. He detailed that his mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, as well as providing him with black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do to carry out the grim task, including taking a thorough shower upon returning home to eliminate any traces of gunpowder. Ultimately, Judy took responsibility for disposing of the weapon, the clothes worn during the crime, and her husband's wallet. Facing the inevitable in July 2009, 6 years after her husband's death, Judy surrendered to the authorities and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution requested that she be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35 years. Judy, nearing 40, was sentenced to 33 years in prison in late August 2009. The following month, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years. And in early October, Christina, who eventually pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, received a 5-year sentence. Press reports indicate that Daniel was released in 2017 after participating in a community transition court program and chose to live a low-profile life thereafter. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but tragically, she died from a drug overdose shortly after her release. This case is marked by greed. Despite Judy's difficult early life and later success, her insatiable desire for more led her to commit heinous crimes. Sadly, her actions not only destroyed a successful entrepreneur, but also profoundly impacted her 4 children, leading 2 to prison and leaving the younger ones without their father and mother. Emma Caldwell, a 27-year-old resident of Glasgow, graced the streets of this vibrant city with her presence. Her captivating beauty and infectious spirit were a beacon of light amidst the bustling chaos. However, fate had a sinister plan in store for this young woman. On that fateful day, April 4, 2005, the watchful eyes of CCTV captured her essence for the last time. Days turned into an agonizing eternity as her family anxiously awaited any word from their beloved Emma. It was on April 5th, when the weight of her absence became unbearable, that her family reported her missing to the authorities. The police, recognizing the urgency of the situation, embarked on a relentless search to retrace Emma's steps. Their hearts were filled with hope, yearning to find her safe and sound. Little did they know, the path they were about to tread would lead them to the darkest depths of despair. 5 weeks later, on that somber day of May 5, 2005, was discovered. The desolate woods became the haunting stage for this tragic finale. There, in the solitude of nature's embrace, lay Emma's lifeless body, stripped of all clothing, vulnerable to the elements that had mercilessly claimed her. The sight was a dagger to the soul, a heart-wrenching tableau that no one should ever witness. The grim reality was devastating, for her body bore the cruel marks of an unforgiving fate. She was not merely found, she was strangled. Her once vibrant eyes now forever closed. Her once lively body now a haunting shade of blue. Emma Caldwell, a name that will forever be etched in the annals of Glasgow's history. Who was she, and what sequence of events led to her gruesome fate? Join us on this harrowing journey as we unravel the key evidence in this perplexing puzzle. In the heart of Glasgow, a city that has seen its fair share of darkness, Emma's story stands as a testament to the resilience of its people. Despite the city's reputation for crime, its inhabitants remain steadfast, united in their support for one another. Emma's absence left a void that perhaps holds the answers to the enigma that surrounds her. In the depths of South Lanarkshire, in the quaint village of Roberton, a glimmer of hope emerges. It is there that we may find the missing pieces to reconstruct Emma's tragic tale. The tale of Emma Caldwell, discovered in the woods, reverberates throughout the land, serving as a poignant reminder of the enigmatic nature that can sometimes permeate even the most captivating corners of Scotland. Emma Caldwell, born on September 2, 1977, in Scotland, was raised by her devoted parents, Margaret and William Caldwell. Throughout her childhood, Emma enjoyed typical pastimes, but it was horse riding that truly ignited her passion, bringing her immense tranquility and happiness. However, tragedy befell her family, forever altering the course of her life. At the age of 20, Emma experienced the devastating loss of her sister, Karen Caldwell, an event that profoundly impacted her. As grief cast its shadow over her existence, Emma's world began to shift dramatically. In her search for solace, she found herself grappling with overwhelming emotions, battling a pain that seemed insurmountable. Within the sanctuary of the stables where she worked, Emma stumbled upon heroin, a tempting promise to numb the ache in her heart. Thus began a harrowing journey, overshadowed by the relentless grip of addiction. Despite her parents' earnest efforts to extend a helping hand, found herself ensnared by the clutches of heroin. During this time, she resided in a hostel for 2 years, which became the focal point of her life, dictating her choices and leading her down an unforeseen path. To sustain her habit, Emma turned to the streets of Glasgow, engaging in sex work to meet the insatiable demands of her addiction. Despite these arduous struggles, she remained connected to her family, seeking solace in their embrace and frequently visiting them. Within her mother, Margaret's unwavering presence, Emma found solace and stability amidst the chaos that consumed her life. Margaret provided care, performed simple tasks like laundry, and created a semblance of normalcy for her daughter. Those who intimately knew Emma described her as trusting and somewhat naive, her vulnerability seemingly drawing her towards companionship with others fighting similar battles. Emma formed strong connections with friends who had experienced similar struggles with addiction and hardship in their lives. Unfortunately, her story took a tragic turn on the fateful night of April 5, 2005. Emma was last seen between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. that day on London Road, Glasgow, as captured by CCTV cameras. She left her hostel and headed towards Glasgow's red light district, but she never returned. Her sudden disappearance left her family desperate, and they tirelessly searched for her, night after night, hoping for her safe return. 5 days later, on April 10, 2005, her family reported her missing, intensifying the efforts to find her. Sadly, after 5 weeks, Emma's lifeless body was discovered in the woods at Robertson, South Lanarkshire on May 8, 2005. She had been stripped naked and choked to death. The site where her body was found was filled with unrelated items, painting a grim picture of the prevalent sexual activity in the area. The investigation into Emma Caldwell's tragic death was a complex and determined pursuit that spanned several years. A dedicated team from Police Scotland, working closely with the Scottish Police Authority and the Crown Office, led the investigation under the guidance of a senior investigating officer, detective superintendent. They meticulously gathered information and left no stone unturned in their quest for answers. Initially, their focus was on retracing Emma's steps. They carefully reviewed CCTV footage, interviewed witnesses, and traced her digital footprint. Through this process, they were able to determine her last known movements, which occurred between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on April 5, 2005, on London Road, Glasgow. This information helped them establish a timeline of events. The police also shared an image of a jacket similar to the one Emma was wearing in the CCTV footage. The missing dark brown suede jacket with an imitation fur collar and cuffs, along with the dark-colored handbag, still eludes discovery. As they combed through the scenes, they unearthed a plethora of clues, each shedding light on a different aspect of the truth. The uncovering of women's clothing in torn magazines strewn across the woods where Emma's body was found prompted a thorough investigation. While these items were not directly linked to Emma, they added to the enigmatic tapestry. Delving into Emma Caldwell's client list, they stumbled upon a diverse array of individuals, ranging from bankers to students, priests, and even a police officer. One particular client emerged as the last person to have contact with Emma on the fateful night she vanished. Tracing her final phone signal to a Turkish cafe, the police swiftly descended upon the establishment upon discovering traces of Emma's blood on the bedding. The origins of the blood remained ambiguous, hinting at potential violence or illicit activities within the cafe. The investigation took a dark turn as harrowing tales from other Glasgow workers surfaced, painting a chilling portrait of the perils these women endured. Accounts of leaving hair in clients' cars for safety, dropping subtle hints out of fear of attacks, and horrifying encounters at the Turkish cafe came to light. Despite covert surveillance for 2 years and thousands of conversations recorded, the men at the cafe remained tight-lipped about Emma's murder. While arrests were made, the case crumbled due to insufficient evidence, marking a glaring setback in the inquiry. In the pursuit of unraveling the enigma surrounding Emma Caldwell's tragic demise, the diligent investigators meticulously scrutinized various individuals. Amongst them, a man of 32 winters named Ian Packer, possessing an equally rugged demeanor, captivated their attention. Packer's significance arose from his deep-rooted connections within the community and his previous affiliations. His extensive network encompassed frequent encounters with individuals entrenched in Glasgow's notorious red light district, including both workers and other denizens associated with the area. Witnesses provided bone-chilling accounts, and those who bore witness to peculiar occurrences spun tales that seemed to intertwine him with locations reminiscent of where Emma's lifeless body was discovered. Packer's recurrent interactions with the authorities, coupled with his disconcerting past, aroused suspicion. The investigation into the untimely demise of Emma Caldwell encountered numerous obstacles, concealing the true veracity of the matter. As detectives delved deeper into Emma Caldwell's case, 5 individuals found themselves under the piercing gaze of suspicion. Amongst them, the most prominent figure was none other than Ian Packer. Packer, a frequent patron of Emma's services, emerged as a central figure due to his incessant interactions with her. A multitude of sex workers expressed their unease regarding his recurring presence alongside Emma, deeming him a dubious character. Their vivid recollections recounted instances of coercion, explosive fits of rage, and aggressive behavior, often transpiring in secluded woodland areas, akin to the location where Emma's lifeless form was discovered. Apart from Packer, the investigative spotlight also illuminated 4 other men: Hussein Kobanoglu, now 63, hailing from Irvine; Halil Kandel, a 42-year-old man from Qatar; Abu Bakir Anku, 39, from Springbogue; and Mustafa Soylames, who was 44 years old. Initially charged with Emma's murder in 2007, their names were thrust into the realm of suspicion. However, within a year, the case crumbled under the weight of police and prosecution errors, plunging the investigation into disarray. Packer, cunningly evading charges, precipitated a costly £4 million endeavor christened Operation Guard. Translated transcripts were fiercely disputed, and surveillance recordings failed to provide unequivocal evidence, leaving the truth shrouded in darkness. In 2015, a reinvestigation was initiated, uncovering the unauthorized seizure of phone data from whistleblowers. Unfortunately, only one conviction was obtained through a retrial, which is a disheartening outcome considering the 7 murders that were investigated. Ian Packer, born in 1973, emerged as a significant suspect during the reinvestigation due to his frequent interactions with Emma Caldwell. Troublingly, Workers reported that Packer had a habit of taking them to secluded wooded areas similar to where Emma's body was discovered. He now faces accusations of 45 other offenses, including 11 counts of alleged abduction, indecent assault, and sexual assault involving multiple women. These charges also involve 3 men and 1 boy who are listed as victims of alleged assaults. Additionally, Packer is accused of engaging in lewd or inappropriate behavior. Witness testimonies have painted a disturbing picture describing instances of coercion, angry outbursts, and aggressive behavior that align with Packer's known conduct. One specific incident involving accusations of inappropriate behavior behind billboards has added a sinister layer to the suspicions surrounding him. As the investigation progressed, Packer shifted from denying any involvement to admitting to multiple interactions with Emma during an interview with a journalist. Despite acknowledging his presence in the woods on several occasions, he vehemently denies any connection to her tragic death. However, his troubled past, which includes a history of violence against women and a conviction for throttling his ex-partner, has raised alarming concerns. Now, 51 years old in 2024, Ian Packer is facing serious charges. Beyond his association with Emma's case, Packer is confronted with a range of serious charges that span over a significant 26-year period, indicating a disturbing pattern of behavior that extends far beyond the tragedy surrounding Emma's death. Furthermore, Packer's involvement in assaulting his former girlfriend in Clarkston Airdrie between November 1st and November 30th, 2018, led to his arrest in November. The occurrences encompass Packer forcefully propelling her onto a sumptuous bed and constricting her airway, leading to a subsequent pronouncement of guilt. Ian Packer, the perpetrator, was handed a 2-year custodial sentence and a 5-year restraining order for his abhorrent assault on his former companion. In addition to these charges, he was implicated in the murder of Emma Caldwell, alongside a staggering tally of 45 other transgressions. Packer adamantly pleaded his innocence against all accusations, and an extensive 11-week trial has been meticulously scheduled to commence this year. These unfolding events serve to further entangle the intricate web of Packer's character, shedding light on a sordid past marred by a series of criminal misdeeds, which may potentially intertwine with the ongoing investigation into the untimely demise of Emma Caldwell. Jordan chased Zara for about half a mile with a shadow of persistence and evil. Zara, unaware of the danger, continued on her way without suspecting that evil was already approaching. Suddenly he appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, grabbed her by the neck with one hand and covered her mouth with the other so that the girl would not scream. He blocked her breathing and then dragged her into the thicket of the forest where darkness and inhumanity awaited the victim. There, a forgotten corner of the world, hell descended on Zara. He forcibly invaded her body, her soul, leaving only a scream of pain and horror that was lost in the darkness of the night. Despite her desperate attempts to resist, her cries remained unanswered in the ruthless void. This whole nightmare, this terrible aggression, lasted for 9 whole minutes, which seemed like an eternity for Zara, who felt fear and hopelessness. Then, as if nothing had happened, Jordan walked back to his house, leaving behind only traces of destruction and an absolute nightmare. But what if all this was just the beginning of an even more eerie and mysterious story? What if the hidden truth about what happened that terrible night turned out to be more confusing and dark than it seemed at first glance? Secrets hidden in the shadows of the past can destroy not only lives, but also destroy all that remains of hope and peace in this world. Only by digging deeper one can find the answers. But there are even more questions hiding behind them. In the winter of 1986, Zara Alina was born in the vast landscapes of Great Britain. She was the first of 5 children of a single mother, a young woman who mysteriously moved her life from the Pakistani slums to this corner of the UK back in 1968. Zara embodied the hopes and dreams of her parents, and her birth was an important event. She was the first granddaughter of Radha Parvin, and it brought her a special status in her community. From early childhood, Zara was surrounded by relatives who raised her to a pedestal, showering her with tenderness and care. She grew up surrounded by numerous generations, studying at a unique school of life where the rules were written in blood and betrayal. Despite their lack of finances, Zara's parents invested everything in their daughter's education, believing that she would be able to find everything she needed for a successful life. Their dreams were strong, their hopes were stronger, but in this world of dark streets and hidden ambitions, Zara's life was in danger, hanging over her like a dark cloud. From early childhood, the fire of passion and hunger for life burned in Zara's heart. She dived into the world of tap dancing, where every movement, like a note in a symphony of passion, gave birth to beauty and harmony. Swimming was another passion of her soul, allowing her to escape from the gray everyday life and feel the wave of freedom. She always dressed exquisitely, as if creating a work of art from herself, embodying her dreams in every outfit. But that was just the beginning. When she skated for the first time, she felt new breath of freedom in her soul. Skating became not just a hobby for her, but a way of breathing, a way of expressing the deepest essence of her soul. Among those who knew Zara, no one was surprised to hear that she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Her heart was full of desire to protect and help others because she was that bright ray of hope in a world full of evil. Her friendly nature sparkled with joy, which was contagious, like a fire in the dark. Her gaze and sparkling eyes promised miracles, and her black curly hair seemed to have been created to tempt fate. Her image was full of charm, like a magic potion mixing passion, kindness, and courage in an extraordinary cocktail of attractiveness. Already in her teens, she had the opportunity to travel around England and visit museums and galleries. She showed big interest in art and culture. These trips became an indicator of how independent she was. Later, trips to the rest of Europe followed. This was a clear confirmation that she inherited the desire for adventure from her relatives. It seems she was following in the footsteps of her Aunt Farah, who, unlike the rest of the family, chose Portugal over the UK. It was fascinating for a young woman to see the work of her aunt, who worked as a psychotherapist in women's organizations. Zara visited her several times. After graduating from high school, her aspirations began to be realized when she got in the University of Westminster. Since then, she worked hard to achieve her goals while taking care of her mother and grandmother at the same time. Her tiny figure was full of a passionate soul and unstoppable energy. Her sense of justice and equality was not limited to the walls of the lecture hall. On the contrary, the generous and caring Zara supported refugees fleeing violence and sought to give a voice to those who had less power. She also participated in volunteer work in community canteens to help the homeless. In general, she had a special habit of noticing the needs of others and always including them in her schedule. Zara was an easygoing girl. Her Aunt Smira Naz lived nearby, and she often visited her several times a week. While preparing for the exams, she asked her aunt to help her to study, but they always ended up laughing. Zara left a trail of joy behind her everywhere she went, as those who knew her at that time claimed. In addition, she was hardworking, covered all her expenses, and helped her family. She worked at a local clothing store and knew everyone in the area, from teenagers to the elderly. She always greeted everyone with kindness and was willing to help if necessary. The young girl could talk for hours, but it did not affect her ability to listen carefully to others. Her generosity extended to all living creatures, and she especially loved cats. Sometimes she spent her own money to take stray cats to the vet, take care of them at home, or persuade neighbors to take them in. Her friend Sanji Naira described her as radiant and believed that her main gift was the ability to share optimism. When Sanji was in a bad mood, he turned to her for help. In Zara's life, there was a bright star whose name was engraved in the very depths of her heart: Carissa Peters. They were not just friends, but companions in the struggle for justice, for protection of women from violence and abuse. Their shared hobbies, especially in the field of women's rights, and it was the connecting thread that carried their friendship through difficulties and trials. Zara and Carissa were so close that they seemed to share the same soul. They easily entered each other's house as if they were their own shelters from the storms of the world, or talked on the phone almost every day, discussing the news, their thoughts and plans for the future. In 2002, after successfully passing the exams and completing her internship in law field, Zara had the opportunity to work in the Crown Prosecution Service. It was an important step and an integral part of her dream to become a full-fledged lawyer. To do this, she worked tirelessly, even when her studies were interrupted by worries about her mother and grandmother, as well as financial difficulties. This step was important not only for her, but also for Carissa, and for those who believed in her, who support her on this stormy journey to a bright future. On her first day at her new job, Zara couldn't help but be happy. She sent a smiley selfie to her friends and family, as if announcing to the whole world her new era of life. It wasn't just a new job. It was the last piece in the mosaic of her dreams. She had been coming to this for so long that she could hardly believe in her own happiness. Working as an administrator might seem a secondary post, but for Zara, it was a giant step towards her goal. At the age of 35, she realized that a new stage in her life was beginning, and this made her heart beat with extraordinary force. It wasn't just a working day. It was the beginning of a new era. An era when she felt fulfilled and happy. The new job strengthened her confidence in the fact that it was time to create her own family. She dreamed of her children, how they would be happy and protected, how they would live in a world filled with love and harmony. At that moment, Zara realized that every new day was a step towards her happiness, a step towards her dream of having her own family. With such an active life between work, volunteering, friends, and the attentive care of her mother and grandmother, with whom she lived in a separate room when necessary, Zara loved to walk. She liked to move freely. She didn't bother with small things. She could easily put a pair of shoes in her bag to change them for sneakers when needed. Zara believed that a woman should be able to move freely without any obstacles, and even more so that no one should have deprived them of this right. But near her house, there was a man whose existence completely took away this woman's right. His name was Jordan McSweeney. He was a few years younger than Zara, and it was unknown where he was from. One Saturday evening, when the sun had already set below the horizon, Zara was going to meet a friend. Even though she was not in the mood, she decided not to cancel the meeting. Zara's word was as strong as steel, and she always stuck to her promises, not allowing her mood to dictate her actions. Her devotion was as steady as a rock, and she was ready to walk through thick and thin for the sake of her friends. Before leaving, Zara picked up the phone to talk to Aunt Farah. But this time, there was a certain anxiety in her voice that did not go unnoticed. Her aunt asked her to be careful, and Zara realized that even if she wasn't going to go far from home, the world around her seemed strange and unpredictable that evening. But she stubbornly told herself that she knew every dark corner of the city, and her name was known to everyone who had ever looked at her. But something about this evening made her heart beat faster, and Zara decided to be more careful. At the appointed time, she met her friend at a local bar called the Ilford Big Spoon, located on the West End of London. Ilford is a lively and diverse London area, an ideal place for dinner and gatherings. So the girls visited this place that Saturday evening. Then they went to another bar, and there Zara drank a couple glasses of water. At the same time, Jordan was having one drink after another at another nearby nightclub. An idea was forming in his mind, and he refused to resist it. He intended to find a woman to attack that evening. Surveillance cameras recorded how Jordan met women at the entrance to the club, hugged them without their consent, and tried to kiss them. He was particularly persistent with one of the employees, despite her obvious reluctance. He was kicked out of the club a little after 23 o'clock, and his inappropriate behavior remained recorded on cameras. When he came out, his actions were recorded by cameras as he walked along Romford Street towards the park. Seeing the woman walking, Jordan followed her and approached her closely. Although she tried to avoid him by entering the store, he was waiting for her outside. When the woman cautiously left, Jordan followed her again. Then he walked down the other side of the street, leaving her in sight. However, when the woman entered her house, Jordan had no choice but to continue on his way. According to the surveillance camera's data, at about 2 a.m. on Cranbrook Street, Jordan noticed a woman approaching him. Suddenly, he quickened his pace, approaching her. But on the video, you can see that two passing witnesses noticed Jordan's strange actions. Despite the man's suspicious behavior, the woman returned home safely, leaving Jordan surprised and annoyed. He returned to Cranbrook Street without success. At this time, Zara and her friend deciding to return home left the bar when it was 2 a.m. A friend took a taxi, preferring convenience, while Zara, given the short distance and good weather, decided to walk. They parted, and Zara headed down the residential street of Cranbrook, which is a 10-minute walk from her house. That's when Jordan noticed her. According to the chief inspector, Dave Williams, Jordan had a clear intention. He was going to attack a woman that night regardless of the location. Cranbrook Street remained busy even in the early morning hours. There was a constant flow of traffic. At the age of 13, Jordan had already been sentenced in Kent Juvenile Court for various offenses committed between 2006 and 2009. In August 2010, when he was 17 years old, he was found guilty of assaulting a girl, leaving her with a swollen eye, and he was given a 4-month detention and correction period. 11 years later, he attacked another woman, and he was again banned from approaching a woman, this time for 3 years. During this time, he had no right to contact her directly or indirectly. By 2010, Jordan had 28 convictions for 69 crimes, including theft, assaults on police and the public, criminal cases, theft of motor vehicles, traffic violations, committing crimes with bail, and shoplifting. On his page on a well-known social network, he bragged about having a huge collection of weapons, and in general extolled a criminal lifestyle to the sky, posting different photos and quotes. He also posted fake pictures saying that the FBI was looking for him. On June 17, 2022, he was released on parole after being sentenced to prison for criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, and illegal carrying of a bladed weapon. One of the conditions was meetings with a parole officer. Jordan settled into a van on St. Valentine Street in a 130 acres park in the south of Gun Hill, the largest green space in London's Red Bridge district. He again violated all agreements and, true to his criminal background, missed not one, but 2 meetings with a parole officer. As a result, the authorities refused to give him the advantage. The parole service began the procedure for returning him to prison on June 22, 2022. But they did not immediately inform the police, but only 2 days later. Early on Saturday morning, June 25th, police visited Jordan's mother's house to arrest him and found an unpleasant surprise. He was not there. Around 2:30 a.m. on June 26, 2022, the streets of Ilford witnessed a terrible crime. Zara was found on the sidewalk with signs of abuse on her body. Her belongings were scattered, as if the mess in her life was embodied in the streets. Her body was bruised, her clothes were torn, and her eyes showed struggle for survival. A woman passing by immediately realized that the situation was extremely serious. Without hesitation, she began to give Zara a closed chest massage and do CPR, trying to give her the last hope of survival. But the injuries inflicted on her body turned out to be too serious. Even with all the help of passers-by and emergency medical help, it was too late. Zara fought for her life, but the severe wounds and brutality of the crime were too strong. At 9:58 a.m. on Sunday, she passed away, leaving only the painful traces of a struggle behind. At that time, at about 11 a.m. in the park, Jordan, recorded by security cameras, was getting rid of evidence, throwing out his clothes. With his indifferent and cold-blooded demeanor, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The police responded quickly and knocked on Zara's grandmother's door, asking her to identify her granddaughter from the bar's video footage. When she confirmed that it was her, the police finally explained to her what had happened. Zara's uncle, Casamolina, called the rest of the family, including Aunt Farah, to tell them what had happened. In Portugal, her aunt, crying, remembered the call on Saturday night. After she broke the news to her children, Farah immediately flew to London. The family was in shock, trembling with horror. It was difficult for all of them to eat, sleep, or talk. Although they hardly dared to mention Zara's death, they also could not think of anything else. Meanwhile, detectives immediately began investigating the area where Zara was found. One of the first steps was to collect video footage from surveillance cameras to track the attacker's movements. This, along with the bloody fingerprints left near the scene, allowed them to identify Jordan. They then tracked his location using a video surveillance system. After receiving images of the main suspect, Inspector Dave sent an officer to Gun Hill to check if anyone else recognized Jordan. The operation was successful, and almost immediately they found Jordan sleeping in his van. The authorities immediately arrested him. Confused and stunned, Jordan had no resistance during the arrest. Clothes and shoes stained with blood were found in his trailer, which Jordan was trying to get rid of. Despite many hours of interrogation, Jordan remained silent, refusing to reveal his name or give details of his life. At the same time, new video footage continued to appear, allowing police to reconstruct the chronology of events. The crime led parole officer Justin Russell to highlight a number of errors in the treatment of Jordan. It was noted that Jordan had been a criminal since the age of 16, both in and out of prison, which made him a high-risk criminal. He had been a high-risk criminal since the age of 16, but it turned out that he had not been treated appropriately. They should have taken more urgent measures to return him to prison after he missed scheduled supervision appointments upon release from detention. They didn't do it. On Wednesday, June 29th, through a press release read by the police, Zara's family expressed how shocking the last few days have been. Logically, for them, it was an irreparable loss. Nevertheless, they stressed that the warmth and kindness shown by people were valuable to them and served as evidence of the strength of their beloved Zara's spirit. The family had a lot to do, and they needed to find strength. Aunt Farah communicated with the media and met with the police. Despite the shock and grief, her family, especially her aunt, taking into account her own experience in this field, knew that it was necessary to control the situation and protect Zara from accusations from certain media. On July 1st, 2022, a preliminary hearing was held in the Jordan case. And on September 30th of the same year, a date was set for a hearing to prepare testimony in the trial. However, on the day of the scheduled trial, Jordan did not show up due to a positive test for COVID-19, and the hearing had to be postponed. On Saturday, July 2nd, a memorial service was held in memory of Zara, organized by her family, which took place on the way to her home, symbolizing the last journey that never ended. At this service, many of those present were dressed in white, symbolizing a silent walk. The event was attended by a coalition of more than 120 organizations specializing in supporting women, expressing solidarity in the fight against violence. It was one of the many groups that worked with Zara Alina's family. As they stated in the media, they demanded justice and taking responsibility. Additionally, they asked to focus on what they considered a priority and key issue, to resist violence from men, and to stop the acts of violators. At a preliminary hearing before the investigation at the East London court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Persett said, she believes there is reason that local police officers could and should have taken more action to find Jordan before his attack on Zara. Consequently, she expressed the opinion that juries should resolve this issue. In addition, this investigation should have included the actions of the staff of corrections facilities for probationers. According to Nadia, this process was supposed to last a month. On November 16, 2022, Jordan also did not appear at the hearing despite being told that this was mandatory. Thus, the meeting was organized via video call. This time, he pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow then described him as extremely unfit candidate for bail. This opinion was also supported by Judge Chima Grove. As for the verdict, the judge postponed it until December 14th of the same year. Approaching this date, Jordan again refused to appear in court. But even this did not prevent Jordan from being sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 33 years in prison for the murder of Zara Alina. The accused and his representatives filed an appeal, and the sentence was reduced to 33 years in prison. The judge stated that the fact that Zara was unconscious, did not feel anything, and did not suffer reduced his sentence. Just 4 months later, it became known that Jordan had an intimate relationship with a woman who worked at the Belmar Correctional Service in South London, but was not a direct employee of the prison services. The Metropolitan Police later announced that a 32-year-old woman whose identity was not disclosed had been arrested, and was under investigation on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. As for Zara Alina's family, everyone remembers Zara with love and pride. They still miss her. For her part, Aunt Farah continues to speak out against violence against women and girls. In March 2023, she joined a march organized by various groups seeking to draw attention to the issue and raise awareness. The protesters marched through the commercial district of West London to Trafalgar Square. Among various slogans, they stated that the lack of action against male violence is equal to abuse by the state. The tragic loss of Zara Alina has only added dark shades to this bloody picture of violence that consumes the hearts and minds of those who seek to change the world. Stacey Pinnell was born on September 5, 1967, in the small American town of Ripley, Mississippi. She had a younger brother and sister with whom she spent a lot of time and got along well with. Stacey was an energetic person with many friends. In school, she enjoyed participating in extracurricular activities. She joined the marching band, where she played a decorative wooden rifle. After graduating from high school in 1985, she attended Northeast Mississippi Community College in Boonville. Although it was about a 30-minute drive from her home, she decided to live in the dormitory. From the first days of college, Stacey was thrilled, made many friends, and joined the local marching band. On October 7, 1985, Stacey attended a training session after school, met up with her boyfriend, and went to a party on campus. At 12:30 a.m., she returned to the dormitory with her friends. They chatted for a bit, and then she went to sleep. At around 2:30 a.m., her roommate, Amy Wheeler, returned to the dormitory after the party but had lost her keys and had to knock on the door. The room was designed for 2 people, so only Stacey could open the door. However, there was no response to the knocking. Amy waited there for a few minutes before deciding to knock on the adjacent room's door. The dormitory was designed such that there was a common bathroom between the 2 rooms, so Amy could go through the bathroom of the adjacent room. A student named Stephanie Alexander lived in that room, who woke up to the knocking and opened the door. Both girls were surprised that Stacey did not respond to the knocking, so they entered her room together. The room was completely dark, and the only light came from a very dim lamp. Amy entered the room and saw Stacey lying on her bed, but one of her legs was hanging down, and she felt that something was not right with her friend. Getting closer, She was horrified to see blood on the bed. After recovering from the shock, she ran out of the room to get help. Other students responded to her screams and the dormitory guard called 911. The police arrived and found an alarming scene. Stacy was dead, and there were traces of blood all over the room. There was a pillow over her face, and her underwear was pulled down. The investigators also noticed that someone had cut the mosquito netting of the window. Next to the bed, they found a wooden rifle that Stacy had used in parades with the marching band. It was covered in blood and wrapped in a towel. The police assumed the rifle had been used in the murder. Upon examining the crime scene more closely, forensic experts found a short hair on the victim's bed. All this was enough to form a preliminary picture of what had happened. Someone had made a hole in the window of Stacy's room, climbed in, raped, and murdered her. However, this version of events quickly revealed some inconsistencies. The size of the hole in the mosquito netting was too small for an adult to pass through. The window in question was situated at a certain height from the ground, which would have made the perpetrator's task more difficult. The police did not find the cut piece of the mosquito netting either. Furthermore, forensic experts examined the victim's body and found no traces of male biological material, casting doubt on the theory that the victim had been raped. At the same time, the pathologist confirmed that the wooden rifle, with a high degree of probability, was the murder weapon, as the injury characteristics indicated that the victim had been struck multiple times with it. Experts also did not find any defensive wounds on her body, suggesting that the victim did not resist the attacker. All possible evidence from Stacy's room was collected by crime scene investigators, but none of it furthered the investigation. At the time, DNA analysis was not commonly used, so the investigators could not examine the blood samples or other potential biological traces. Additionally, no fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, as the perpetrator had apparently wiped it clean with the towel. Despite the lack of leads, detectives still hoped that experts might find something in the room, so they decided to take fingerprints from all individuals who theoretically could have entered the women's dormitory. This task proved to be very difficult as the police had to speak with hundreds of male university students and ask them to volunteer their fingerprints. They also took prints from all male staff members. The problem was that only girls lived in this residence, and a special key was needed to enter the building. Men could only enter in a few instances, such as being let in by residents or being college employees with a key. Nevertheless, the female residents frequently invited their boyfriends and male friends, which meant that the officers had to spend a lot of time collecting their fingerprints. However, in the end, this led to no results, since no matching prints were found at the crime scene. With no leads, the investigators turned to a psychologist and asked for a psychological profile of the killer. After reviewing all the available information, the specialist posited that the attacker was likely a man between 20 and 24 years old with a strong physical build and no criminal record. The psychologist believed that the crime was not premeditated. The killer saw an opportunity and decided to attack the victim. This description made the officers further doubt that the criminal had entered the room through the window, as the hole in the mosquito netting was too small for a large, adult man to pass through. Meanwhile, panic spread among the college students. The female students were afraid to be in their residences, fearing they could become the next victim of the unknown assailant. The fact that the police could not find any clues only heightened the overall anxiety. The officers continued to search for possible suspects and decided to investigate Stacy's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne. They searched his room in the residence and found nothing to suggest his involvement. Investigators found it impossible to establish whether Stacy Pinnell's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne, had any motive for her murder. According to Stacy's friends, the couple rarely argued and had no significant issues. However, the investigators learned from Stacy's parents that before starting college, she had another boyfriend named Ben with whom she had broken up just a few months earlier. Ben and Stacy had been in a long-term relationship during school, and he had even given her a ring, hoping to marry her in the future. But Stacy ended the relationship. Despite Ben's reluctance to accept the breakup and his refusal to take the ring back, Stacy did not change her decision. Up until Stacy left for college, Ben repeatedly tried to meet with her, but she remained firm in her decision. The detective spoke with Ben, who claimed that on the night of the murder, he was asleep at home. His mother corroborated his alibi, stating that he went to bed around 11 p.m. and was home the next morning. However, the investigators considered the possibility that Ben could have left the house undetected, gone to Stacy's college, committed the murder, and then returned home. Ben agreed to undergo a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. The operator could not determine if he was telling the truth. A second interrogation yielded the same results. This made the detective suspicious, but without concrete evidence, they could not link him to the crime. Experts attempted to determine if the hair found on Stacy's bed belonged to Ben, but they were unable to reach a definitive conclusion. Since DNA analysis was not commonly used at that time to confirm or refute such evidence, it was not possible to do so. Due to the uncertain polygraph results, Ben became the prime suspect in the case, but Stacy's relatives did not believe he was capable of harming her. They described him as kind and well-mannered, always taking care of her. However, without evidence, the police could not charge him, and the search for clues continued. Later on, the investigators re-examined the case materials and noticed something peculiar. When examining the cut in the mosquito netting, they observed that the fibers were directed towards the outside rather than inside, indicating that the piece had been cut from within Stacy's room, not from outside. This discovery further puzzled the detectives. If the killer did not enter through the window, he must have had a key or entered with one of the residents. However, the police doubted this was possible since there was a guard in the dormitory who sat near the entrance and watched everyone who came in and out. For several months, there were no significant developments in the case. Then, the lead detective decided to seek assistance from Steve Rhodes, the sheriff of Illinois, who was well known in law enforcement circles for his unique approach to interrogations based on neurolinguistic programming. He frequently spoke at police seminars and had a reputation for being able to extract information from almost any suspect and detect lies. Steve agreed to interrogate 4 people involved in the case: Stacy's neighbors, Amy and Stephanie, as well as Ben and Tommy. In September 1986, he began his work, starting with Amy. She recounted everything she knew, and the officer found no reason to doubt her words. He then spoke with Stephanie, who said that on the night in question, she took an anti-inflammatory medication prescribed by a doctor and went to sleep. At around 12:30 a.m., Stephanie heard Stacy and her friends returning to the dormitory and talking loudly in Stacy's room. Stephanie went to ask them to speak more quietly. After her request, Stacy's friends left for their rooms and Stephanie went to bed. However, Steve Rhodes, an experienced investigator, sensed that Stephanie was withholding important details. He accused her of lying and urged her to tell the truth. Despite Stephanie's insistence that she was not deceiving him, Rhodes continued to press her with questions until she finally revealed that she had returned to Stacy's room after the friends had left. This was a shocking development for the detectives nearly a year after the murder. After a long pause during the questioning, Stephanie, to everyone's surprise, confessed that she had killed Stacy. According to Stephanie, she had entered Stacy's room for a chat. At some point, the conversation turned to Tommy Osborne, Stacy's boyfriend. Stephanie complimented Tommy, which upset Stacy. When Stacy demanded that Stephanie stay away from Tommy, the conversation escalated. After an exchange of words, Stacy slapped Stephanie, who retaliated in kind. The altercation became physical, and at some point, Stephanie grabbed a wooden rifle next to the bed and struck Stacy, causing her to fall onto the bed. Stephanie then hit Stacy several times more until she stopped moving. Realizing what she had done after seeing the blood, Stephanie panicked and decided to dispose of the evidence. She locked the bedroom door, washed the blood off her hands, and then staged the scene to make it look as if someone had broken into the room, raped, and killed Stacy. She placed a pillow over Stacy's head, pulled down her underwear, and then cut a hole in the mosquito netting, hiding the cut piece in Stacy's closet under a pile of clothes. She cleaned the wooden rifle with a towel and took a shower to remove any traces of blood. Stephanie then decided to get rid of her t-shirt and the piece of mosquito netting she had cut. She locked herself in the bathroom and burned them, then masked the smell of smoke by spraying a large amount of perfume. After covering her tracks, Stephanie went to bed and was only awakened when Amy knocked on her door. The detectives were astonished by this confession. For a whole year, it had never occurred to them that the killer could be a woman, let alone Stacy's dormitory neighbor. Stephanie was arrested and charged with Stacy's murder. 3 days later, she wrote a letter to her boyfriend, whom she had been dating for a week at the university, detailing the events and claiming it was an accident. She wrote that on the day of the murder, she had taken some energy pills and was not thinking clearly. She didn't even remember the moment of the murder, but had seen it in nightmares throughout the year. Days after sending the letter, the case took another unexpected turn. Stephanie claimed that Steve Rhodes had put her in some sort of trance using his techniques and had implanted the confession in her mind. She insisted she couldn't have killed Stacy and accused the police of taking advantage of her vulnerable state to close the case. According to her, the energy pills clouded her mind, allowing Steve Rhodes to convince her over time that she had indeed killed her neighbor. In 1987, a judge held 3-day hearings to determine the truth of her statements. The detectives asserted that Stephanie had not been subjected to any undue pressure and that no one had hypnotized her. They argued that in her confession, she mentioned details only the murderer could know, such as where she hid the knife used to cut the mosquito netting. The detectives hadn't found it during their initial investigation, but after Stephanie's confession, they found the knife in the closet under a pile of clothes. However, there were nuances. Firstly, the girls were neighbors and often entered each other's rooms, so Stephanie might have known about the knife's location under different circumstances. Secondly, no evidence could confirm or refute that the net had been cut with that specific knife. Nonetheless, the judge concluded that Stephanie's initial testimony was not obtained through hypnosis or any other form of manipulation. The trial began in 1988. Stephanie's lawyers continued to argue that her confession was coerced and highlighted the lack of evidence against their client. They emphasized that the lie detection tactics used by Steve Rhodes were not scientifically founded and could not be used in court according to the law. Rhodes claimed that one could tell if someone was lying by observing their eye movements. Furthermore, Stephanie's lawyers presented medical examination results indicating that her cognitive abilities could have been impaired due to the energy pills, making her more susceptible to manipulation like hypnosis. The prosecution argued that Stephanie knew details unknown to investigators at the time of the interrogation, making her testimony credible. They also conducted a court experiment with a psychological sciences doctor attempting to hypnotize her, concluding that it was not possible to induce such a state in her. The victim's relatives also shared interesting information, stating that Steve Rhodes had mentioned Stephanie several times, considering her a problematic person and, to some extent, fearing her. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury eventually found Stephanie guilty of involuntary manslaughter, sentencing her to 20 years in prison, of which she served 9 before being released on parole. Once freed, Stephanie continued to maintain her innocence and hired lawyers to revisit the case. During their review, the lawyers noticed similarities with another murder committed in 1993. At that time, a man named Charles Crawford attacked a girl who lived 40 minutes away by car from the college Stacy Pinnell attended. There were some notable similarities between these two cases. Firstly, the other victim also attended Northeast Mississippi Community College in Boonville. Secondly, the perpetrator entered her home by cutting a hole in the mosquito netting. Stephanie and her lawyers believed that Charles Crawford could be behind Stacy's murder. Crawford was arrested in 1993 and subsequently sentenced to death. The challenge lies in the lack of evidence to prove his guilt in Stacy's case. However, there were significant developments. Stephanie's lawyers discovered that on the wooden rifle found at the crime scene, there was a drop of blood that did not belong to Stacy. DNA analysis of this evidence had not been carried out at the time, as a case review was necessary to proceed with it. Additionally, the victim's underwear was sent to an independent expert, and they were able to extract a DNA sample from an unknown male. This sample has not been added to the FBI's database for comparison with Crawford's DNA, because a case review is required for that as well. Moreover, there is no guarantee that the sample found is related to the murder. Supporting the possibility of Crawford's involvement, the lawyers pointed out other facts. Crawford lived near the college at that time, and allegedly 2 witnesses saw him near the campus a few days before the murder. However, there is no reliable confirmation of this sighting. Despite similarities between the 2 crimes, there are discrepancies. The cut in the mosquito netting was made from inside the room to the outside, which discounts the possibility of an intruder entering from the street. Additionally, Crawford's height was 6 feet and 1 inch, making it unlikely that he could fit through such a small opening. Another contentious point is that the murderer used Stacy's wooden rifle as a weapon. If Crawford had really decided to enter the victim's room and kill her, it is hard to imagine that he would not have brought a weapon with him. Currently, Stephanie and her lawyers are still trying to obtain a case review that would allow comparison of the evidence with Crawford's DNA. Crawford remains on death row, having even spoken with detectives about Stacy's case, but the police could not determine if he was near the college on the night of the murder. It was a chilly day on November 28, 1992, when something unusual caught the eye of a group of people near the Walker Wildlife Area, off River Road in Colorado. As they approached the spot, they were struck with horror. The decomposed body of a man lay there, missing its skull. But even in death, the man was making a statement. He wore green shorts with bold black designs, and a tanned black pullover shirt with a mysterious logo on the left side of the chest. The sleeves were cut off at the biceps. The people called it in, and authorities sprang into action, racing to the scene with sirens blaring. As they arrived, they quickly got to work, scouring the area for any clues that could help them identify the man. They searched high and low, turning over every stone, but alas, nothing came up. Even the man's clothes yielded no hints as to his identity, leaving the authorities scratching their heads in bewilderment. With no other choice, they took the body away for autopsy and identification, hoping that they could at least get some answers there. The medical examiner performed the autopsy, and what they discovered left them reeling. The man had been stabbed to death, leaving no doubt it was a case of homicide. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, and fear began to set in. Who would do such a thing and why? The investigators knew that they had their work cut out for them, and they were determined to solve the gruesome crime. Little did they know the road ahead would be filled with twists and turns, leading them down a dark path of mystery and intrigue. The investigation began with a sense of purpose, as detectives searched for any lead that could bring them closer to solving the mystery. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, it became clear that this was going to be no ordinary case. The trail was cold, and every lead they pursued led them to a dead end. The absence of the man's head was a puzzle that haunted them day and night. Where could it have gone? Was it taken as a trophy, or was it buried somewhere out of sight? The detectives were determined to get to the bottom of it all, but they were up against a formidable adversary: time. As the months turned into years, the case became colder and colder. The memories of the man in green shorts began to fade, and it seemed as though justice would never be served. However, detectives never gave up hope, and they would one day uncover the truth. Years passed, and new technologies emerged that promised to make their jobs easier. In 2011, the case was revisited, and the National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems was brought in to assist in the investigation. But despite their best efforts, the detectives found themselves once again hitting a dead end. Every lead they pursued seemed to fizzle out, and they were left with nothing but more questions. It was a frustrating time for everyone involved as they grappled with the realization that they may never uncover the man's true identity. But the detectives refused to give up, even as the years continued to tick by. They knew that there was always a chance that new information could come to light, and they remained ever vigilant, never letting the case slip completely from their minds. In the year 2022, the Mesa County Sheriff's Office was determined to leave no stone unturned in their quest to bring justice for the man in green shorts. They knew that traditional investigative methods had failed them in the past, so they decided to turn to cutting-edge technology for help. They reached out to Othrim, a forensic DNA analysis company, in the hopes that advanced genetic testing could help them finally establish the man's identity, or identify a close relative who could provide vital information. It was a long shot, but detectives were willing to try anything to crack the case. But advanced DNA testing doesn't come cheap, and the detectives knew that they would need to secure funding to move forward. So they turned to DNA Solves, a platform that combines crowdfunding, volunteer data, and cutting-edge genomics to solve unsolvable cases. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the detectives and the generosity of the public, the funds were raised and the testing could begin. The skeletal remains of the man in green shorts were a puzzle that had confounded detectives for nearly 3 decades. But the remarkable advancements in forensic science helped them to finally begin putting some of the pieces together. The remains were carefully packaged up and sent to Othrim's state-of-the-art lab in the Woodlands, Texas. There, a team of brilliant forensic scientists worked tirelessly to extract DNA from the bones and build a comprehensive genetic profile for the unknown man. Using a cutting-edge technique called forensic-grade genome sequencing, they were able to piece together a complete DNA sequence, painting a picture of the man's genetic makeup like never before. But having a DNA profile was just the beginning. The team at Othrim knew they needed to use this information to generate investigative leads that could help them to identify the man. And that's exactly what they did. With the help of their in-house genealogy team, they employed the power of forensic genetic genealogy to trace the man's distant relatives and create a comprehensive family tree. This information was then shared with the Mesa County Sheriff's Office, who were then able to identify a potential sibling of the unknown man. With a DNA sample from the sibling, the team at Othrim was able to confirm that the unidentified man was Edith Thomas E.T. Romero. The discovery of Edith's identity was a significant breakthrough for the Mesa County Sheriff's Office. But with the mystery of his death still unsolved, detectives knew they had to dig deeper to uncover the truth. Edith had come a long way from his early life, but the details of his upbringing remained shrouded in mystery. Despite this, detectives were able to piece together a picture of the man he had become. As detectives delved into his past, they discovered a man who had lived a life of service and sacrifice. His military service was just one example of the courage and bravery that defined him. They discovered that Edith was just 26 years old when he met his untimely end. He had ventured to Grand Junction, Colorado in the company of 2 other individuals from Louisiana in 1991. He resided in a now-demolished house on 4th Street and worked as a dishwasher in a local eatery. The details surrounding his death remained hazy, but it is believed that he was killed during the summer of 1992. Now, as detectives continue to piece together Edith's story, they're asking for the public's help. If you have any information that could shed light on his untimely death, please do not hesitate to contact the authorities. Every little bit of information could bring us closer to the truth. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959 in Houston, Texas. She grew up in a loving family and was very close to her sister. In high school, Kathy met a boy named Mike, and a few years later they got married. The couple settled in a quiet suburb of Houston, and soon after their wedding, they had a daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987 they had a son. At that time, Kathy was 27 years old. After her second child was born, she spent all her time at home taking care of the kids. Mike worked at a small sign factory owned by Kathy's father, and the family had enough money to provide for their children. Kathy's parents also helped them financially, allowing her to dedicate all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with her children as usual, while Mike was at work. When his shift ended, decided to meet up with some friends and headed to a bar. Mike called his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer. This was unusual, as Kathy rarely had the opportunity to leave the house, even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, he called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Looking through the living room window, he saw that the TV was on, so he kept knocking, but there was no response. Tim started to worry that something might have happened to Kathy. Instead of going back home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town looking for patrol officers. After driving for a few minutes, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, asking them to check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and got no answer to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Entering the house, they immediately discovered Kathy's daughter on the living room sofa. She was unconscious with visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, they found the younger child in his crib, safe and sound. But in another room, they were met with a horrifying sight. Kathy lay on the floor, covered in blood. She was naked. The police immediately determined that she was dead. Her hands were also tied with a lamp cord. The paramedics took Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began examining the crime scene. Soon after, Kathy's father arrived at the house, but the police didn't reveal all the details of what had happened. Instead, they asked him to go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she woke up. He complied, and while he was waiting at the hospital, he learned about his daughter's death from a news report on the TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police immediately noticed something strange. Besides the fact that he showed up quite late, there were several stains on his shirt that looked like blood. The police asked him to hand over his clothes and answer their questions. Meanwhile, investigators made some interesting discoveries. First, they found many bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had tried to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had stayed in the house for some time instead of leaving immediately after the murder. Second, forensic experts found no signs of forced entry. All the windows and doors except the front door were locked. This indicated that Kathy either let the attacker in herself or they had a key. The police also noted another detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor next to her body. This not only suggested the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had folded her clothes so carefully. The detectives assumed that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to comply with his demands. Kathy might have agreed to do whatever they say, only to be killed afterward. Meanwhile, medics were fighting for Kathy's daughter's life. They determined that she had been severely beaten, likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she fell into a coma, and her chances of survival remained low. Medical experts examined Kathy's body and determined that she had received 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdomen area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and extracted biological material from the perpetrator. However, in those years, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science, so the experts could not extract a DNA profile from the semen. The best they could do was determine the perpetrator's blood type, so the biological material was sent to a lab. From the early hours of the investigation, the police began to focus their attention on the victim's husband. After noticing the suspicious stains on his shirt, they took his clothing for examination. Mike's behavior that evening also seemed strange. After work, he went out with friends, but instead of going home himself when he couldn't reach his wife, he asked a neighbor to check on her. Detectives had seen similar tactics before, where a husband committed the murder and created an alibi, such as going out with friends. Then he would ask someone else to check on his wife to avoid being the one to find the body and divert suspicion from himself. Mike's involvement would also explain the lack of forced entry. Investigators began looking into whether he had the opportunity to commit the murder before meeting his friends. The detectives soon discovered something else. Mike had a criminal history. Right after high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover cop. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison but served only 2 before being released on parole. Sometime later, he married Kathy. But despite this, police needed more evidence to charge him. They also started investigating the neighbor, Tim, whose behavior seemed odd. Instead of calling the police from his home, he drove around town looking for patrol officers. The detectives also examined Tim's car and made an interesting discovery. There were suspicious stains on the floor mats that looked like blood, so they were also sent to the lab. Investigators began to wonder whether Mike and Tim could have committed the crime together or if one of them acted alone. Meanwhile, medical experts finished their report and reached an intriguing conclusion. They determined that Kathy had died around 1 p.m., about 6 hours before she was found. This meant the detectives now had to investigate where the suspects were long before the evening and what they did after the murder. Mike and Tim both claimed they were at work, so the police began verifying their alibis. Meanwhile, 2 days after the murder, they received a call from the hospital. Kathy's daughter had suddenly come out of her coma. Her life was no longer in danger and investigators went to see her, hoping she could shed light on what had happened. But they quickly encountered a problem. The girl, who was only 4 years old at the time, had almost completely lost her memory of that day. All she could recall was a man with light hair entering their house. Both her father and Tim had dark hair, but the detectives didn't rush to rule them out as suspects. They considered the possibility that the girl's memory could be inaccurate due to the severe trauma she had suffered. They consulted with psychologists and asked them to work with the girl, hoping she might remember more details about the perpetrator. The detectives soon received a call from the lab, and there was another unexpected twist. The experts examined the evidence from the 2 suspects and found that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were machine oil and the stains on the husband's shirt were just paint. But that wasn't all. Numerous colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked at different jobs, confirmed that they had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until the evening. This meant neither man had the opportunity to be at Kathy's house and commit the crime. Detectives asked them to undergo polygraph tests and the results showed no signs of deception in both cases. The police, who had been almost certain of the involvement of at least one of the 2 suspects, found themselves back at square one. They began considering other possible suspects who were familiar with the victim and could have got inside her house without difficulty. Detectives spoke with Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might have committed the crime, and soon they discovered something unexpected. Many of them, without any hesitation, named the same person, Greg. Greg was Kathy's brother-in-law, and her loved ones revealed that she had often complained about his behavior. According to Kathy, Greg openly flirted with her and had repeatedly tried to persuade the woman to engage in intimacy with him. Kathy also mentioned that Greg often made inappropriate comments about her stomach, and, as we know, most of the stab wounds were located in that area. The police also learned that Greg regularly used illegal substances and had a criminal history. Detectives began to focus on him and soon found their first potential lead. Forensic experts discovered a fingerprint in Kathy's house that matched Greg's, as well as a hair resembling his. However, there was a problem. Since Greg often visited Kathy and her husband, the fingerprint and hair could have been left there before the murderer. Kathy's parents stated that they believed he was the murderer. Her mother also shared an interesting observation. While she was at the hospital with her granddaughter, Greg came to visit them in the middle of the night. As soon as the girl saw him, she looked at her grandmother, and judging by the expression on her face, she was very frightened. After Greg left, the grandmother asked if he was the man who had come to their house, but the girl said she still couldn't remember. After hearing all of this, the detectives called Greg in for questioning. He denied any involvement in the murder and said he was with a friend at the time, who also had lengthy criminal history. In the middle of the interrogation, Greg said he needed to go to the parking lot to pay for additional time to avoid a ticket. However, the man never returned to the station. His wife, Kathy's sister, recounted that on that day, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 in the morning and picked her up at 2:30 p.m. So he had a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder and provided him with the opportunity to kill Kathy. But despite all this, the police lacked any substantial evidence that could prove his involvement. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body, but in those years, experts could only determine the blood type of its owner. It would also require a large sample, and after conducting such a test, there would be very little biological material left for further examination. Nevertheless, the detectives decided to conduct this test, and the blood type of the sample's owner from Kathy's body matched Greg's blood type. However, this result also didn't prove his guilt, so investigators couldn't arrest him. They continued to search for other evidence, but they couldn't prove Greg's involvement. Eventually, the case hit a dead end. Kathy's family was convinced that Greg was the killer, but they couldn't do anything about it. Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to believe that her husband did it and continued to live with him. In the following years, detectives revisited the case from time to time, hoping to find any new leads. In 1998, 11 years after the murder, they requested DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they faced another setback. Experts could only extract a partial DNA profile, which, when compared to Greg's DNA sample, yielded inconclusive results. The analysis showed that Greg belonged to the 2% of the population who could match the partial profile. Unable to arrest him based on this result, detectives once again called Greg in for questioning, telling him that the semen from the victim's body matched his DNA. To their surprise, Greg changed his initial statement, claiming that he had a consensual relationship with Kathy, and he indeed visited her on the day of the murder. But the man insisted that she was alive when he left. Detectives were obviously skeptical of Greg's sudden change in story. Such shifts are quite common in murder cases when suspects hear about DNA matches. Additionally, Kathy had complained about Greg's advances, feeling uncomfortable around him, so it was highly unlikely that she would have been in a secret relationship with him. But despite their suspicions, detectives knew they couldn't secure a conviction without a full DNA match. The local prosecutors reviewed the case and confirmed that obtaining a guilty verdict would be practically impossible, and the case once again went cold for several years. In 2002, detectives reopened the investigation and sought the help of forensic scientist Catherine Long, who was conducting groundbreaking DNA research at the time. She and her colleagues wanted to determine if genetic material from a perpetrator's hands could remain on the victim's body after strangulation, and if it could be extracted for analysis. To test this, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation by squeezing each other's necks, then took samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were quite intriguing. Even brief interaction left behind enough skin particles for DNA analysis. The detectives working on Kathy's case became interested in their experiment, despite the fact that the victim had not been strangled. Re-examining her body years later was also not possible. Instead, they began reviewing all available evidence to see if the perpetrator could have come into contact with any other items. Their attention soon turned to the lamp cord used to bind Kathy's hands. It was evident that only the killer could have tightened it, as the victim herself simply could not have done so. The detectives handed over the cord to Catherine, who, along with her colleagues, began examining it. They first noted an important detail. The cord had been stored in a paper bag, allowing air to circulate and preventing moisture buildup, which could have compromised biological samples. Experts took swabs from the entire length of the cord, including the areas where traces of Kathy's blood remained. Upon analysis, they discovered 2 DNA profiles. The first, belonging to the victim, was expected, but the second profile perfectly matched Greg's DNA sample. That meant the detectives finally obtained strong evidence that Greg was the person who bound Kathy's hands, and therefore he was the killer. Shortly thereafter, 15 years after the murder, the man was finally arrested. During interrogation, he refused to admit his guilt, insisting that he had a romantic relationship with Kathy. The detectives obviously didn't believe him and, armed with the DNA evidence, decided to take the case to court. While awaiting trial, Greg was placed in prison. Sometime later, the detectives received an interesting call. His cellmate reached out to them, claiming that Greg had confessed to him. According to the cellmate, Greg boasted about assaulting and killing his wife's sister in detail. He said that on the day of the incident, Greg took illegal substances and went to Kathy's house. Once inside, he attempted to coerce her into an intimate encounter, but she resisted and demanded he leave. Greg then approached her daughter and inflicted a series of severe blows on her. After that, he told Kathy that if she didn't do everything he wanted, he would kill her son. Kathy, who had no other choice, agreed to protect her children. Greg tied her up, assaulted her and killed her, inflicting numerous stab wounds. He then washed the blood off himself in the bathroom and changed into her husband's clothes to avoid getting blood in his own car. The detectives had no doubt about the truthfulness of the cellmate's words, as he couldn't have possibly guessed so many key details even if he had read about the case in the news. Armed with the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time he finally confessed. He admitted to killing Kathy and repeated everything he had told his cellmate. In 2004, he pleaded guilty before the judge and received a 45-year prison sentence. However, he only served 4 years and died of liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, didn't live to see the killer's arrest. He passed away at the age of 45. Kathy's children and parents thanked the detectives for bringing the case to a close, even though it took 15 years. All this time, they were almost certain that Greg was the murderer and had to watch him continue to live with their second daughter, but couldn't do anything about it.